Before we do, there are quite a few thank yous that I want to make sure happen as a result. This conference just doesn't materialize out of thin air. It takes a tremendous amount of work. It was about this time last year that we had some conversations amongst our operational leads with the consortium. And certainly I want to thank our operational leads for the Florida Consortium. Paul DeSalle with the University of South Florida, Elizabeth Behair with FIU, and Mary Beth Ehas with UCF. They're my three bosses, so think about your life and then know that you have a guy up here that has three bosses, and they all do a fantastic job of keeping the conversations that we need in this state going, and also supporting the kinds of events like we produced today. So yeah, quick thank you. And then if you're one of the folks, especially on the USF campus, but also in our office that worked on the conference committee, if you're around, if you want to just raise your hand a little bit so people can kind of see who you are. There's a few of you in here. Or they're eating. Thank you. This is not an undertaking that's easy to do, and they put in some extra time that I don't think is part of their job descriptions. So it's always nice to see. AK Consulting Group has helped us with a lot of the logistics and doing a lot of the work, so we want to thank them for their work. And then hopefully you'll had a chance to meet a couple of our staff members from the consortium office, and if not, try and say hi on the way out. But Latoya Hodge and Sylvia Padillo has been here and kind of walking around and hopefully hobnobbing with y'all. So I want to thank them for the work that they do in our office. And then I think what really made this conference go, and what ultimately was the final decision that was made that made this a special place to be for the last couple of days, are the ambassadors from USF, these students over here that have been doing a lot of great work. I know we're going to talk about data here in a minute, and what data can do to help further higher education and also for K-12 and our community colleges and the work that we do in Central Florida, but also all throughout the state. But I do say this partly in jest, but partly I'm serious. I teach policy in higher education at UCF as part of my role, and I often tell my students that if you give me 5 really good students from like these ambassadors, you can bring all the data you want to. I'm going to beat you every time with their stories and the conversations that they have. They represent our university so well and really show exactly why higher education matters and who these projects are really benefiting and what the end result is. So they're fantastic representatives of everything that we do, and I'm really excited that they're here. Today we're going to close out with kind of the closing argument from our past 2.5 days. We've been exposed to a lot of big ideas from a 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 foot vantage point, as well as some of the tactical day-to-day innovations that we see on our campuses and throughout our state. The kind of innovation that can and drive impact for students, faculty, and staff. I can't stress enough how important our collective contributions and partnerships are to the future of higher education. And some of those partnerships include getting together with not just our higher education partners, but also partners in K-12, our community colleges, business, industry, and also our state stakeholders. That's why I'm pleased to close out the National Student Success Conference with a panel that's going to show that some of the engaged work that's happening in Central Florida. And in just a minute, they're going to introduce themselves more formally, but today's panel consists of Dr. Scott Fritz. He's the Chief of Staff for Teaching, Leading, and Learning in Osceola County Public Schools. Dr. Barbara Jenkins, Superintendent from the Orange County Public Schools. Dr. Dale Whitaker, Provost and Executive Vice President at the University of Central Florida. And Dr. Sandy Shugart, President at Valencia College. But there's also another person that's going to be taking the stage, and that's going to be our panel director today, and that's Paul Luna. Paul Luna is President and CEO of the Helios Education Foundation, and if I can just take a quick moment of personal privilege. When I took this job in July of 2015, one of the first people that I had a chance to meet and work with from Helios was Braulio Colon, who I have a chance to have a lot of conversations with. And we look at our philanthropic organizations as a source of funding in many cases, but in the case of Helios, they're a thought partner. Beyond any resources that we receive, I have to say that the conversations that I've had, especially with Braulio over the last couple of years, have been integral to the growth of our consortium and the work that we do every single day. And those conversations aren't always easy to have. We have to have conversations that challenge each other in order to move forward. So I want to thank a lot of the staff from Helios is here and thank them for being here today and for sponsoring this closing plenary session. So thank you very much. And Paul is the head honcho there. Paul is responsible for guiding the strategic direction of Helios. He is charged with cultivating strong community relationships and initiating strategic partnerships in Arizona and Florida for the Helios Education Foundation. He brings more than 25 years of public and private professional experience to his leadership roles at Helios. Like many of our students, Paul is a first-generation college student. He attended a small school called Stanford University, you may have heard of it, while earning a degree in civil engineering. In addition to his role at Helios, he's all about meaningful partnerships and working for the greater good. He's a member of the Greater Phoenix Leadership, Greater Phoenix Economic Council, the Aspen Institute's Youth and Engagement Advisory Circle, the National College Access Network Board of Directors, the America's Promise Alliance Board of Directors, the Florida College Access Network Steering Committee, the Center for the Future of Arizona Board of Directors, the Arizona Community Foundation Board of Directors, and Paul, am I missing anything? I think you got them all there. Paul was also the founding chair of Expect More Arizona Board of Directors. So I'd like to welcome all of our panelists up to the stage and Mr. Paul Luna.
So good afternoon, everyone. As our panel members make their way up to sit down, I'm going to start from the podium and just share a couple of framing remarks. And first off, just to first thank Michael Preston for the work and the leadership that he does in leading the consortium. And it truly is our privilege at Helios to be partners with him and all of you in this work and this effort. And I also want to echo on behalf of myself, and I would say on behalf of the panel, thank you to him, his bosses, all the individuals that he recognized to help make this conference possible, and all of you for attending. So let's give yourselves a round of applause for the time that you've taken to be here today. And Michael, because I think we're going to do this many more times as we continue to partner, just say, hey, it's Paul Luna, the Helios guy. All right, that's really what it is, right? We're proud to be your partner. So we have the privilege this afternoon, I think, of hearing from 4 true leaders in education. Leaders not only within the organizations they represent and the communities with which they serve, Florida overall, but quite frankly, leaders nationally. Individuals who collectively and individually are helping to set a framework for what we all can do to better serve students to be successful in education and in life and career. And so what we want to talk about today is really share a little bit about how the entire continuum works together to the benefit of student success. And if we think about and acknowledge the education continuum and how success is defined for a student beginning in those early education environments, ensuring that they're prepared socially and academically for that first day of kindergarten, how students then learn so much through their K-12 educational environments, eventually leading to completion and some type of post-secondary degree. And if we acknowledge that success of a student is often dependent upon the success of the phase prior in that continuum, the questions that we're really asking ourselves today is, how does this continuum really work together? How do the phases of education integrate? And how well do these phases of the continuum understand and anticipate what the needs of the next phase that the student's going to be finding themselves in? And how do we go about making that better? So the premise of a seamless education continuum or an ecosystem is what we're exploring this afternoon, and we have 4 individuals who are, again, leading, I believe, the nation in ensuring that this ecosystem type of work will come together. So what we're going to try to do, and I think my job is to tee up the key questions, is we're going to try to create a dialogue of these education leaders around that concept and hear from them and hopefully learn from them, you know, what their vision is for this type of ecosystem approach, and ultimately how we know and believe this will lead to greater student success. So when I start the panel, when I tee up a question for them first, I'll ask them to share a little bit more about themselves. You all know who they are. But if they want to share a little bit more about themselves, but we're going to get this dialogue going, and hopefully we'll all have more to take away at the end of this conference from the benefit of hearing from them. So thank you, and let's give the panel a round of applause. So I get to do my Oprah thing here. So, all right. So I'm going to start with Sandy in terms of having had a chance to work with you and knowing and hearing your vision for what this type of ecosystem project might look like, and knowing that you've been one of the voices that has helped to frame this. I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about how this concept of cradle to career integrating with predictive analytics and this data ecosystem approach, and how this has come together, and maybe if you would describe what this cradle to career ecosystem really looks like and what it means and why it's important.
Well, I'm Sandy Sugart. Nice to see all of you. It's been my privilege to serve Valencia College and work with partners from leaders from our partnering institutions for some 18 years. So we've been at this a little while. Paula, first thing I'd say is that we're doing this not because we're smarter than anybody else or luckier than anybody else, but because our environment requires it. And we maybe were more aware of the ecosystem challenge than others because of the unusual nature of Central Florida. So here's 2.2, 2.3 million people, but the growth came so late in our history that the metropolitan area missed the higher education boom of the 19th century and the early to mid 20th century. So we have a relative small handful of institutions to serve a huge population. If you took our population and moved them to North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Ohio, there'd be 40 colleges. There'd be, in some of those places, there'd be 11 or 12 school districts. We have 2 school districts, 1 university, and 1 large community college and some other community colleges in the area that are good partners as well. And so we knew we had to work together in a different way from the beginning. You cannot choose to be a niche institution and say, we're only going to take care of these kinds of students and the others can go somewhere else. There's nowhere else to go. So we have to operate at scale, and we have to operate across the spectrum of student needs, and that requires partnership. So from early days, we've partnered at a very high level between the institutions. This is, Barbara will tell you more about stuff, it's an enormous school district. Osceola would be enormous in any other location. It just happens to be next to one that's a little larger than it is. And you know how large UCF is. Valencia is of the same sort of scale. So at scale, we have to figure out how to produce extraordinary results without a lot of others helping. So partnering has always been at the core of that, and we've experienced that in programming and sharing staff and creating transfer pathways that work, and being all the time in each other's institutions. I mean, you may run into staff in any of our campuses from any of these organizations, and their permanent home is there. So we've worked that way for a long time. Now, to cut to the chase, the discussion about how to leverage information to strengthen the performance of that ecosystem really came out of an awareness that we had done all the moving of the needle that can be done by resting on best practices or common wisdom. I'm not knocking best practices. We learn from everybody. But I think what we've learned in 15, 20 years of effort is improving practices based on our common wisdom can move the needle 3 or 4 percentage points. And that's not enough. If we're going to achieve quantum improvements in the education system, then we needed stronger levers. And we began to suspect that evidence was going to be an important lever for that. And for the evidence to be meaningful, it needed to cut across the ecosystem and be at the student unit record level. And there's still some problems with that, but our vision and what we're working hard to do now with the support of Helios is to create the first regional ecosystem that works together off of a singular student unit record K through 20 evidence base. So all of our data will be integrated, normalized, and then the tools of numerical science can be brought to bear to understand things you can't understand with descriptive statistics on large populations, and in particular, causality. So we're in a position, perhaps, for the first time anywhere in the country, if we can pull this off, to answer questions empirically that we've just thrown our best ideas at before. So what does it mean, for example, to be college ready? No one can answer that question empirically. Even the College Board. They can associate a score with later performance, but they can't tell you what it takes to be able to earn that score. So we want to go deep and begin to understand student readiness for the next thing. How do you get students prepared for the next thing? It's failure to prepare and make good transitions, we suspect, that undermines our performance. So we want to understand in a causal framework what can be done to improve the quality of learning and progression of students all the way through the system.
Please, Barbara.
Paul, I'd love to add to that. First of all, and thanks to Helios for actually sponsoring our ability to do this project. And it was actually, he won't take credit for it, and he'll let me have it later on for bringing it up, but actually it was Sandy's brainchild, and when he approached me about it, it just made sense. So let me set the stage. If we were already working collaboratively, direct connect programs for our students, handing off with information, career counselors paid for by Valencia in our high schools, interns working delicately and deliberately with our programs, those partnerships and relationships were already there. What was critical was whether or not we were using all the data and the evidence available to us to better impact student success. And so the best analogy I can give you is we have a handoff. We transfer records, high school transcripts and what have you, but the amount of available data is far more vast than that. So instead of a water hose volume, we actually have fire hydrant of data at our disposal, and we wanted to make sure, and this gives us an opportunity to make sure we're using that evidence adeptly to impact student success.
Well, I'll share from the brainchild of Sandy is I knew it was real when we walked in his office to talk about partnership, and on his little board, the whole diagram was figured out, and it's like, well, let's just take a picture of that, and I think we can make it happen, but a whole lot more work to that. That's exactly right. There's a whole lot more work to that, but we had a good start. So Dale, I want to ask if maybe you would comment. So the reference was made to the uniqueness of the Central Florida community and these institutions working together, because as you know, that doesn't always happen in education, where you can get different institutions to agree on almost anything, but then to agree at this level in terms of focusing on the student. I'm wondering if you might comment on how, from your perspective, you've seen that come about, and what you and the university looks to get out of this at the end of the day in terms of what success would look like for this ecosystem project.
Yeah, so many things to think about there. Let me start with the last one and what it is that UCF would want to get out of it, and that is that every person has value, every person has the opportunity to learn, every person has the opportunity to learn or earn a college degree, regardless of income, and that is certainly not true across the United States. So we know that higher education is concentrated in the higher income brackets, and if you're in the lower income brackets, your probability of having a college degree is 1 in 10, as opposed to 1 in 5. So we have a shared collective goal among us that not only changes the lives of our community individually, but it also changes the nature of our community. So we're in a community in Central Florida that's transforming from agriculture to only 40 years ago, hospitality and entertainment, tourism, to one that is very much transforming to financial services, high technology, artificial intelligence, sensor-based services, and so on. And we don't have the talent pool that other cities have to couple with those, that future economy. So there's an interest at the community level, and there is a value at the individual level that we all share. One of the things that in other communities has always kind of driven me nuts, I don't know if anybody else is in this situation with me, and that is when the university says, well, the high schools just don't prepare them well enough. Or when the university says the state colleges, have different credentials and they must not prepare them well enough. And I have to say, when I first arrived at UCF, there was still a little bit of that, even though we had been in Direct Connect for a number of years. And part of the evidence that we are working on together, there's two pieces of it. One is that an articulation, this idea of having discrete points at which we throw a student over the transom with their record, and someone on the other end hopefully catches them, just isn't acceptable in a partnership. That's at best an articulation. We have, for a decade, 2 decades, committed to a partnership for the community, and the partnership says that we're going to share everything, all the transparency we can with our upstream partners, because we want to make sure that we're identifying the inflection points as early as possible to predict the best possible outcomes for every student along the way. And to Sandy's point, you can't do that without tracking the individual students through the whole system. Fortunately, because there is a lot of trust among this partnership, 2 things have been able to happen. One is, again, uniquely maybe in the United States at this point, we are dangerously close, maybe within 48 hours of having a data sharing agreement. So when we put the stake in that one,
Be still my heart.
yep, when we nail that one, that will be a turning point for public institutions across the country, because we will have figured out the legal and the privacy and the individualization with and anonymization aspects required to see a student all the way through and not to see groups of people. So we have as much variability within groups as we do among groups. Best practices industrialization mentality says, let's do our very best with the majority. We're a little bit beyond that. Now we're saying let's do our very best with discrete groups that we think behave the same. And what everybody else in retail has gone to is, let's treat you as an individual and let's know exactly what you need based on how millions of people like you have behaved in the past. We have 10 years worth of data I keep pointing this way, I'm sorry, Scott. We have 10 years of data collectively among us. We have hundreds of thousands of student choices, behaviors, and outcomes. And for this next group of students coming through, we can say for the hundreds of thousands of cases before you, were there 20 or 30 that looked a whole lot like you? And if so, can we look at how they turned out in their future and what the trajectories were and what inflection points really mattered for that person? So that's the opportunity among us. And to just tie a bow around it, I think the real reason this hasn't happened anywhere else is because the relationship, the trust, and the collective commitment to individual people hasn't existed for long enough to get through it.
So Scott, I'm going to ask if you might pick it up from there. And from your perspective, why is this, what do you look to get out of this kind of from the end goal? But also, why would you engage in such a meaningful project as well?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. I'm going to tell you, Osceola County, while we had cows many, many years ago, there are less cows than there have been. We are the fastest growing county in the state of Florida. We have 10,000 more students this year than we had last year. Wow. We are building 2 high schools to open next school year. And we have industry moving into our county. And in 2010, out of the 67 school districts, our college going rate, we ranked 62nd out of 67. Intentionally, we have worked with the collaboration of Valencia and UCF that last year we were ranked 27 out of 67 districts. So we're starting to send more and more students off to post-secondary education. Part of that is the demands of the industry that is moving into our community. We have international engineering firms that are moving in through Neo City, right in Kissimmee. We have conglomerations that are demanding higher skilled employees. And our parents and our families are wanting us to prepare students in our K-12 system, have those students go locally and return and live in our community. And that's an ask of them, a demand of them, that we provide and prepare our students to do that. And so this collaboration really is important to us. When you drive, if you think about from North Orange County in Apopka, all the way down to South Osceola and Yeehaw Junction, that is a 2-hour drive. And there are many, many students that live along that route. So for us to be able to reach out to them and build these connections is not only a wonderful feat, it is a necessary feat. When you think about Four Corners, the Polk, Lake, Osceola, and Orange County, and you think about driving to Brevard County, it can take you over 2 hours to get there. So being able to have these hubs and these partnerships it's not only a luxury, it's absolutely essential.
Great. Thank you. So one of the themes in all of your statement has been the reference to the success of all students. And Barbara, I would wonder if you might share with us your thoughts about, when we think about first-generation minority and underrepresented populations, and we recognize historically that their academic success or academic achievement and post-secondary completion success has trailed behind their non-minority peers. How do you see this ecosystem project helping to close that achievement gap?
So two things. First, let me at least foundationally say the notion of achievement gaps is not new. And while we've made some progress, I think we have to acknowledge that the gaps are still there and they're still too large. And so if we're going to have a credible effort toward narrowing those gaps, we have to be honest with the data. And let me give you an example. So in Orange County, several years ago, a dozen or more years ago, students who were in AP courses, those college level courses where they could actually get their first college credit before moving on to actually graduating, those opportunities were quite limited. The lock was on the inside of the door. Only certain students were recommended by their teachers or parents pursued it, or God forbid, a student actually asked for something more demanding in their course load. But certain students were being overlooked, quite often unintentionally. Here's the thing that's important to remember. In Orange County, we have about 208,000 students. We're number 9 in the country. With that kind of volume, it's too easy to let children slip through the cracks. And so Scott was actually in Orange County when we had some really significant efforts made around that, and some of that under his leadership, around opening the doors wide for access to AP courses based on data. So if you know you have predictive analytics around PSAT scores, around state assessments, what is the excuse for level 5s or high-performing students who happen to also be children of color or children of poverty? What's the excuse for not giving them an opportunity, giving them a chance in the AP courses? Quite often it may have been unintentional, and so you have to use data. If you have that many children, you've got to use data to drive students into those courses and then provide them with scaffolding and support to help them be successful. Well, I would submit to you the same thing is true with larger quantities of students. If you're going to narrow achievement gaps and you've got vast data, you have to mine that data and use analytics to make sure you're pushing children to the most rigorous courses and giving them opportunities. And so I think this data sharing, that hydrant, fire hydrant that I mentioned earlier, that data sharing will help us even be more precise, more adept, more agile in our identifying students and helping to lead them to success.
Absolutely.
I think it needs to be noodled with.
So,
Pay no attention to that.
Paul,
We're very adaptive in our abilities here. So
Scott and I had a similar conversation at lunch. I'll just bring that up.
Please do.
Was talking about what could we know before the PSAT that would predict that students should be started to be identified, for these AP courses. Now hang with me, this is actually similar. We have a goal at UCF that no student would ever go on probation, but you can't deal with that student after the end of the course. So you can know when a student is on probation, but what we really want to say is we don't want students to go on probation, so we have some information that says within the second or third week, you can start seeing the trends that predict that students are crashing, and you can, for a number of those students, you can reverse those trends. Scott, would you share what you mentioned about second grade?
Well, I'm going to share, but I'm also going to tell you, I'm going to go back farther, and I learned this from my boss down there, Dr. Jenkins. Dr. Jenkins and I walked a Richmond Heights VPK Early Learning Center about 3-4 years ago. And she asked me what was the expectation for the students in that early learning center. These are 4-year-olds. And I said, Dr. Jenkins, they're going to be kindergarten ready. And Dr. Jenkins said to me, wrong answer. She said they're going to be reading.
Reading.
They're going to be reading. And I took that. That was one of those defining lessons learned as a leader for me. And that's been something that I've held on to since that day. That my child was reading when they were 4 years old. Poor children can read when they're 4 years old. And we can push that. So when we talked about those predictive analytics, we talked about that VPK to grade 2 being a proactive approach to changing the trajectory for students that have potential, rather than waiting for that god-awful third grade FSA that retains students.
Yep. Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the future and recognizing that each of you in your institutions, you talked about continued growth and growth in student populations, growth in communities, but you're also, I think, acknowledging the changing demographics. The changing demographics of the community overall, a recent in-migration of Puerto Rican students, primarily from fleeing the hurricane and the impact that's having. I'm wondering if you all might speak to that in terms of how it's impacting your institutions today, but then tying it to, again, this ecosystem project and how that is enabling you to better serve these changing student populations on a go-forward basis as well. So would you start, Sam?
Well, like most of your communities, we're already immensely diverse,
Sure.
and the fault lines are along both in the economy and in the education are well understood. And they're only going to get wider and more difficult over time unless we change the trends in performance. So many of us have been working for a decade or more on closing the gaps in achievement. And made tremendous progress. There was a time around 2008, 2009 when we were ready to declare gaps closed. Gaps closed. They've reopened. It's constant work. We have our hypotheses about them. It'd be wonderful to have student unit record data around which to test those hypotheses. So, for example, we believe we see the SAP policies around Title IV financial aid having a very disparate impact by ethnicity on student persistence. Those sorts of things. Diagnosing before you act. I spend a lot of time, because I have elderly parents in the medical system, and you know instantly when you're with a physician whether they are a scientist who's collecting data, forming a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, and prescribing a treatment, or whether they're a technician who has a punch list of things that they routinely do, typically without listening to you. I see you, I know who you are, I haven't asked a question, I haven't taken your history, I haven't done a test. GI problem, you're going to be treated for GI. I think our institutions perform that way too. So while we understand the fault lines, what we don't understand are the persons within each of those subgroups, and they're not identical. And our habit of talking about populations impedes our capacity to figure out what does this learner need. If high-stakes testing has done anything, it's at least given some learners who were formerly ignored some attention, and you can see it in the results. There's come at a pretty high price, but it's at least done that. I think we need to move that to the individual level. So as diversity increases in our communities and the fault lines threaten to reopen, the solution isn't group-based policies or group-based treatments. It's going to be figuring out how each learner, and they all have the capacities to succeed, how each one needs a different set of conditions in which to thrive, and prescribing those conditions. It's just evidence-based practice.
And I think, Paul, if I may, To that point, for individuals, we had about 3,000 students that came to Central Florida, Orange County for after the hurricane, and we had to certainly work swiftly to help integrate those children and their families, citizens, into our community. Well, Central Florida, people don't realize, is an international community to start with. Our children come from 200 different countries, and they speak 167 different languages and dialects. The majority of them speak Spanish as a second language, Haitian Creole being our second most prevalent second language. But here's the thing, for those students who came to us, our children, they were on the same range as our students that we already serve. So we had some students who came from Puerto Rico who were already taking AP courses and had been promised a college scholarship. And because we have relationships and partnerships, Valencia and UCF picked up the scholarship for those children who have no idea when they'll get back home. But we also had children who came to us not speaking English, so we have to be adept at certainly servicing those children as well. But here's the key. In Central Florida, and I think in this country, we have to celebrate that diversity, and we propose that biliteracy is an additional bonus for individuals entering the workforce and the career sector. And so of our 12,000 graduates, 10% of them receive the biliteracy seal, meaning they speak, read, and write a second language, Spanish or otherwise, and we celebrate that diversity, and it is a competency, a skill set that really should make them even more employable.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, Paul, to your point, there's two thoughts, and this is on new populations. One is that technology is not enough to solve human needs. So technology gives us the ability, if we have the courage, to deploy our humans to their most effective places. The second is that predictive analytics predicts the future based on the history. So we have to be careful, to Sandy's point about gaps rewidening. If we are predicting a student's outcome based on 1,000 students before them that don't look like them, then the prediction's not going to be that great. So we're going to have to constantly be mindful of the human situation, especially when we have new people with new backgrounds and new cultures moving into the system.
Absolutely. I think, we spent a lot of time in K-12 over the years doing what we call drill and kill to get kids up to a level that we think that they're going to be college ready, and we know that doesn't work. I think the best thing about this project is it's going to give us data to be able to do real touches with kids. And so I think about academic advising, and I think about the efforts that both Orange County and Osceola have done in our K-12 with the guidance counselors, that we have to make an intentional effort to touch students and find out where they are on a regular basis, not wait till their junior year. And so some of those efforts will begin in elementary school without a doubt, but we have to continue that all the way along. One of the things that I both know Orange County does and Osceola does is we employ guidance counselors in the summertime. I think that this project with this ecosystem will help redefine that work. We already have administrators that can build master schedules. The work, the return on investment will be putting guidance counselors in front of those freshmen before they start that high school experience and saying, what is it you want from this experience in high school? And let's talk about what the factors will get you there. And that's why this predictive analytics project really excites me, because I think it's going to help give some of our folks that have direct impact on those students the tools they need to get those students where they need to be.
One of the things I want to add to this too, Paul, is that there are shortcuts, and I want to be aware of them. One is to develop the apps without the predictive power beneath them. So there are lots of products out there now that will tell you, we can help you intervene early and so on. And I'm sure they're helpful. Any early intervention is going to show some treatment effect. But most of them lack any real empirical power. And we've decided to slow down and not rush to the apps and make sure we understand how to use this kind of a data resource and the power of numerical science to get to real evidence and not just another kind of best practice. So that's number one. And number two, I think we're going to be challenged to develop an ethics of analytics. There are places that fall into using analytics essentially to risk manage their students. So, here are the green lights, you don't need to spend money on them. Here are the red lights, don't waste any money on them. Here are the orange lights, let's put the money there, or whatever the resource is. So that's just an example of ethical traps associated with knowing a lot more about persons. It always comes with greater responsibility. And I think we'll need conversation around what constitutes an ethics of deep understanding of other people, and how do you avoid manipulating, and how do you avoid prediction becoming destiny, and those sorts of issues. If you keep the success of every student at the center of the conversation instead of the success of the institution, I think we can navigate that.
Yeah, well said.
Agreed.
Well said. So I want to broaden the conversation just a little bit. Most of us in the room are in some way connected to education or to the education system. But I think what we're talking about is really a community approach. And so I'm going to ask the panel to talk a little bit about, so how do we talk about this project in the broader business and community leadership circles? And what do we need in terms of support? What do you all need in terms of support from business leaders and others to help ensure the success of this project as well? So does anybody want to start with that? Barbara, would you?
Certainly. I have thoughts on that. In Orange County, we have significant business partnerships, Paul, to start with, that are intimately integrated with our career pathways. So in our career and technical college, for example, we have advisory boards for every career pathway, for every major industry group. And so they give us feedback around the skills that they need, and we build in our framework both the technical and the soft skills that students need. And so we've got a good back and forth conversation currently. We also have wonderful programs such as Lockheed Martin paying a $2 million cost for Project Lead the Way, which is an engineering curriculum for kindergarten through 12th grade. Northrop Grumman helps us with a magnet program in laser photonics, where they actually employ the children over the summer and actually pay for them to finish their college degree as they're working for them part-time. So we've got good relationships established. Those are just a couple of examples. I think the case can be made that the business community would support this project because it does two things. Number one, it helps us to be corrective or adjust our strategies more rapidly based on evidence to produce, which is the second part of the equation, to produce better candidates for employment. And so if you tell us you need certain skill sets, we have fewer coming through the STEM pipeline, the talent pipeline, then we ought to be able to more adeptly adjust our activities, our efforts with some agility to adjust and then accelerate our production of the kind of students, the kind of employees that our business community needs. So the case can be made for their bottom line that we will produce more rapidly the appropriate employees, successful students that will make successful employees and help their bottom line as well.
Paul, when you get outside of this room, a very common discourse is, do you really need a college degree to get a good job? And there is I think that tangles up two different things. You and I share a similar background in the way we grew up, where work was honored. Physical work was honored in the family. And so it kind of conflates the value of work with the value of a college degree. I don't think this is what the discussion is about. After the recession in 2008, after about 6 million jobs were lost and then about 11 million came back, 80,000 of those jobs required a high school degree. And then about 4.5 million required a 4-year degree, about 6.5 million required a 2-year. A 4-year degree or better. So we're talking about for every job that was created after the recession, for every one job that required a high school degree credential, 120 jobs were created in the economy that required a college credential. So the point, and then you think about the next generation. This is now. You think about the generation that Dan Greenstein was mentioning, 11 million credentials by 2025. And starting with the starting point default that a college degree is what our children need to have the opportunities in the coming economy is one point. The second point, it's kind of acute, and we can talk about the Amazon choices as a very interesting social experiment recently. The Orlando area was, along with Tampa and Miami, were all put forward, good arguments for why Amazon should come to us. And, post that decision, when they chose not to come to Central Florida, collectively among the business community, we've been sort of dissecting that talent, ideas, capital complex, and we're not on the map yet for the kind of talent that attracts knowledge companies. We're getting there very rapidly, but it is a totally, our destinies, the business destiny and the destiny of the lives and social mobility of our next generation are totally intertwined.
So let me ask the panel to as we wrap down towards the end of the session, if you might, for the benefit of the audience, if you could quantify one major takeaway that you would ideally want the audience to take away from this session, or one quantifiable learning or understanding, what might that be? Scott, let's start with you and work down the panel.
This project really has the opportunity to make large geographical areas and large entities smaller and manageable. And I think that has been the wonderful partnership. And I will tell you, from this partnership, we have opened other partnerships. Every entity on this panel right now, I've had 2 different meetings with this week alone. I was at UCF yesterday. Dr. Schugert and I were together earlier this week. I've met with Orange County regarding the influx of students that we've had from Hurricane Maria. That partnership is a huge, huge takeaway from this project. So my parting words are that it makes a large geographical area manageable, and it combines our united goals rather than putting us in silos, so that we educate here, we provide the formal training here, and our residents come back, our students come back and live right here.
Yeah.
I think for me, it would be that maybe for the first time in the history of the United States, we're on the precipice of having a public education system that goes all the way from pre-K through professional school that is focused on and serves everybody. And I think we've had that in the K through 12 public education system for decades. I don't think you could say that about the publicly funded, taxpayer-funded system all the way through higher education in the way that we are collectively thinking about it.
If we say we're all about student success, that our critical role is to lead all of our students to success, and success means having a viable career where you can live a decent life in this country, then we need to be serious about how we get every student to success. And if there are vast amounts of data and evidence that will help us be more precise in leading our students to success, we have to take advantage of it. And I think this project will help us to be more agile about both adjusting and accelerating. So my staff, my team knows, Scott will remember this, I love kind of driving home a message. We've got to be, and they know we're on the 3 A's lately, Scott. We have to be agile at adjusting and accelerating. If you can determine what the evidence says, then you have to take advantage of it for as many students as possible if we're all about their success and impacting their future, so that we have a generation who is not locked into the exact same socioeconomic status that their parents were in, but they can be upwardly mobile and live the great American dream.
I have to say 2, but one's real short.
No, you said both.
The first we didn't talk about, but I just need to say this to you. This isn't easy. This is like teaching 5 elephants to dance together. And it's not easy work. And every day there's some idiotic obstacle to completing the next step. And that's with senior leadership 100% on board. down in the organizations, this is hard. And we'll be happy to share with
Attorneys.
you. Yeah, well, it'd be nice if attorneys returned each other's calls. That would be nice. There are lots of issues like that. But it's just hard to do, and so it's going to take us some time. And we're grateful, Paul, to have a partner who understands that and who's in there kind of swinging with us. Because once we've pulled it off and can demonstrate the value, I think it calls others to the work. Last thing, everybody's starting to use the language of ecosystem, but they don't mean it. They don't really mean it. What they mean is good neighbors, and it's not the same thing. And I've noodled on this a long time. We have been the best neighbors in the country in Central Florida, the best. But it still means when my garden has produced its fruit, I toss it over the fence and you take it and do something with it. It's still not an ecosystem when you function that way. And we looked for a long time on what would be the key elements that would transform great neighbors into a true ecosystem. And I believe information is the secret sauce. I think it's the ingredient that drives us together around the students' performance. I think the depth of our collaboration and the quality of our collaboration and the focus of our collaboration towards student success will be driven only when we can own each other's outcomes and own every student's outcomes all the way across the ecosystem, so that I know and care whether our transfer students are succeeding in their first finance course. And you know and care in the same way when they come to, and I know and care how the math curriculum in the high schools is being organized and whether it's based on empirical evidence or not, rather than somebody's best guess or outvoting another, because it produces a different quality of student. All those things, we start caring about each other's outcomes, I think it changes everything.
Out of respect to the panel, any final comments, any additional last thoughts you'd like to share? Okay.
It occurred to me, Paul, one
Please.
thing, because I don't want anyone to misunderstand. There are issues around FERPA and student privacy. These are what we're talking about. Following at the individual level would still be anonymous records. I don't want anyone to leave
Right.
fearing that we're actually disclosing identifiable
Yes.
information that can be tied to individual students. We're looking at individuals. Sandy, do you want to clarify?
So that will be the first obstacle you run into, and it is overcomable. The trick, and this is where our approach is a little different, is to solve that problem and still own the data rather than someone else owning it. That's the challenge, the sort of technical challenge to this.
So if I could, I'd like to wrap up this conversation with a perspective from Helios and as a partner and an engaged partner, one that we're very proud to be partnered with all of you. And some of this was mentioned throughout the conversation, this idea that the work is not easy. It's not. And I don't think anything that really creates impact in community work ever comes easy. There are no silver bullets. There's no one decision you make at one point in time and suddenly everything gets better. We all know that through our work. But what I would emphasize, which I think is unique here, is this commitment to partnership and collaboration, and you spoke to that. And that doesn't come easy by itself. You know? And so the commitment to collaborative partnerships, to truly engaging, to understanding what others within, what the needs might be and what success looks like for others is really important. But I want to make one final statement, though, about the importance of leadership. Because they're not going to say this, so I can say it from a Helios perspective, a partner perspective. There's nowhere in the country that we have seen, surely nowhere that we have seen in Arizona or Florida, which is the two states that we serve, where you have this type of collaborative partnership coming together with the single goal of ensuring student success for every student. And that is significant. And that alone is what leadership is about. And the other point is the importance of leadership. From a Helios perspective, when we look at any of our partnerships, yes, the work has to be aligned. Yes, it has to have outcomes and do meaningful work. But the most important thing that we look for in determining what we actually partner or invest in is leadership. And one of our founding principles of our founding chair is this idea that all business is personal. And so what's personal about is you learn not just what are we partnering with or what are we funding, but who are we partnering with. And that comes down to leadership. And so on behalf of Helios, I'm proud to say we really do appreciate the leadership all of you provide. You all are never going to stand up and say, we're leading this, or so I want to make sure that that is said. Thank you for the leadership that each of you provide in your institutions, your willingness to collaborate, to lead, because without that, none of this work ever happens. And the true leadership you're providing will, in fact, create that ecosystem that we're talking about. And I want to make sure that that gets acknowledged, and that we all celebrate and recognize the leadership that we have in this community that will enable this work to be done. So thank you for that. Thank you for allowing us to share this story with you. And I know that they'll be around if there's any other specific questions, but let's thank them for being on the panel, but more importantly, thank you for your leadership. Thank you, sir. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. This way.
And I want to thank them all too. We came together to hear from and learn about innovators and innovations. That's why we're here, and we just heard that. And I'm thrilled. I'm going to be watching this project carefully. I think it has so much potential to revolutionize the way we do our work. I want them to succeed. I'm also very happy they're on the bleeding edge and not me. It is difficult work. It is difficult work. But I'm thrilled to close out this conference. It has succeeded beyond my dreams. It's all because of your hard work, your participation, your contributions to the effort. We came here because we wanted to network with friends and colleagues. We came here to learn and share best practices. And a part of what we wanted to do is also just have a little bit of fun. And so last night, the sunset at Oyster Catchers was precious. Those of you who missed it, I hope you will be here next year, because I'm calling this a success, and as I leave today, my first thought is, well, let's do it again. And so, if you're in, I'm in, and we've already got a hold on this hotel next February 27 to March 1, 2019, here. Save the date. We're going to have some conversations with our consortium partners. If all goes well, we will be here again next year, and I hope to see you all here. Thank you so much. Travel safely. Thank you.